Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The night shift had been running for 6 hours. The winch motor hummed. The cold Pacific wind wrapped the deck like a wet shroud. I was Rourke Berryman, 12 years in this work, and still couldn't get used to that particular silence at 3 a.m. Even the gulls were sleeping then. Just the motor, the water slapping the hull, and the winch drum. Eldon Vickery was in the cabin, the radio's dim light turning his face green. Keen Morita was on deck checking the lines, his lantern throwing long shadows across the deck. "Retrieval starts in an hour," Eldon said, sticking his head out of the cabin. "Sonar shows good bottom here, depth around 800 meters. I nodded. The boring thing about night fishing was most of the work happened in pitch darkness. No lights beyond the deck lamps. You couldn't see anything. No horizon, no moon, just your boat's lights and the enormous darkness around them. Sometimes you thought about what was in that darkness. Sometimes you preferred not to think. The sonar beeped, but the sound came out different from normal. Sharp, metallic. I looked at the screen, but it showed what looked like a school of fish. Eldon must have heard it too, because he came out of the cabin with his cigarette smoke. "What's that sound?" he asked. "Don't know. Sonar looks normal." Keen walked over, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Maybe the drum belt is loose. Sometimes makes that sound." When we started bringing up the net, everything was normal. The winch was working, the net was slowly coming out of the water, the drum was turning. Then with a sudden jolt, everything stopped. The motor kept humming, but the drum locked. The winch groaned, the lines went taut. The boat listed slightly to one side. "Stop! Stop!" Eldon shouted. He killed the motor. The boat rocked on the sea, the net hanging somewhere below, refusing to come back up. The silence sounded strange, like the night had been waiting to seep into your ears. Keen looked at the drum, then at the winch cable. "Not the belt," he said. "Cable's clean. Something must be caught down there." "Like what?" I asked. Keen shrugged. "Wreck, rock outcrop, I don't know. We need to cut it before we pull too hard or the cable will snap." Eldon looked at the radar screen, then the sonar. Bottom's at 820 meters. Our net had come up from 150, can't be touching bottom. Keen and I looked at each other. That was the weird part. If the net wasn't touching bottom, what was it caught on? "Look," Keen said, pointing at the sonar screen. Below the bright spots representing the school of fish, there was something else. Large, dense, unmoving. "What is that?" I asked. Eldon leaned closer to the screen. "Don't know. Depth shows it's at maybe 300 meters. Too big for a fish. Maybe a whale?" "Whales don't stay still like that," Keen said. We stood there watching the screen. The mast didn't move. It just sat there in the water column, dark and solid. Our net was somewhere above it, tangled on something we couldn't see. "We need to try pulling it again," Eldon said. "Slow. See if whatever's holding it will let go." Keen and I took our positions. Eldon started the motor and engaged the winch at minimum power. The drum began to turn, slow and grinding. The cable went taut. The boat leaned harder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the net moved. Not up, but sideways, like something was pulling it in a different direction. "That's not right," I said. The drum was turning clockwise, pulling the net up. But the net was moving horizontally through the water. I could see the cable angle changing, see the strain shifting. whatever had the net wasn't letting it come up. It was pulling it deeper. Eldon cut the power. Something's got it. We stood in the silence. The wind had died completely. The ocean was flat, glassy. The only sound was water lapping against the hull and the slow creak of the rigging. "We need to cut it loose," Keene said. "This isn't worth losing the boat over." Eldon nodded slowly. But before he could give the order, the sonar made a sound I'd never heard before. A long, low pulse that seemed to come from the speaker and from somewhere else at the same time. The mass on the screen moved. Just a little, but definitely moved. Rising. "It's coming up," I said. We watched the screen. The mass was ascending. Slow, but steady, and our net was coming with it. The drum began to turn on its own, no motor running. The cable was paying out, feeding more line into the water as whatever was down there rose toward the surface. "Cut the cable," Eldon said. His voice was tight. Keene grabbed the emergency shears we kept for this exact situation. But before he could reach the cable, the drum stopped. Everything stopped. The cable went slack. On the sonar screen, the mass had disappeared. Just gone. One moment it was there, rising toward us. The next moment, nothing. We stood frozen, waiting. The ocean around us was perfectly still. No wind, no waves, just the boat sitting on water that looked like dark glass. Then the net came up. The drum engaged on its own and began pulling the net aboard, faster than we normally ran it. Line was feeding through the winch so quick it smoked. Keene reached for the shutoff, but Eldon grabbed his arm. "Let it come," he said. The net broke the surface. In the deck lights, I could see it was full, heavy with catch. But something was wrong with the shape. The net should have been round, bulging with fish. This one was stretched, distorted, like something had been in there and pushed its way out from the inside. The net came aboard and dumped its load on the deck. Fish poured out. Salmon and rockfish and things I couldn't identify in the tangle of silver and blood. But as the pile settled, I saw what was missing. There was a hole in the net, not torn, but cut. The mesh had been severed in a perfect circle about 3 feet across. The edges were smooth, like something had burned through them. "What cuts net like that?" Keene asked. Nobody answered. We stood looking at the hole, at the fish scattered around it, at the empty space where something should have been but wasn't. Eldon checked the sonar again. The screen was clear. Normal bottom reading at 800 meters. Nothing else. Like the mass had never been there. "We're done for tonight," Eldon said. "Bring in the rest of the gear. We're heading back." We worked in silence. My hands were shaking as I coiled the lines. Keene moved like he was in a dream, slow and careful, checking over his shoulder at the dark water. The boat felt different now. Smaller. More exposed. As we pulled in the last marker buoy, I heard it. Low, so low I felt it more than heard it. A vibration that came up through the hull and into my bones. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. "You hear that?" I asked. Keene nodded. Eldon was already in the cabin, firing up the engine. "We're leaving," he said. "Now!" The trip back took 3 hours. Nobody spoke. I stood on the deck watching the water behind us, looking for I don't know what. Movement, lights, something breaking the surface. But there was nothing. Just dark water and the white line of our wake disappearing into the blackness. When we reached the harbor, the sun was starting to rise. Other boats were heading out for the day shift. They called to us on the radio, asking about the night's catch. Eldon told them it was slow, equipment problems. He didn't mention the rest. We unloaded the catch in silence. The fish looked normal in the dock lights. Nothing strange about them except they'd been in a net with something else. Something that had cut its way out and then disappeared into water so deep no light ever reached it. I've been back out since. You don't stop fishing because of one weird night. But I don't work that area anymore. None of us do. When other fishermen ask why we avoid those coordinates, we tell them the bottom's too rough, too many snags. It's easier than telling the truth, because the truth is we don't know what was down there. We don't know what held our net and then let it go. We don't know what cut that perfect hole and disappeared before we could see it. And we don't know if it's still out there, waiting in the dark water, patient and invisible. Sometimes on quiet nights, when I'm alone in the cabin, I still hear that sound. The low vibration that came up through the hull. It's probably just the motor or the current against the keel or my imagination. But I know what it felt like. Like something large and old and aware was letting us know it was there. Letting us know we were small and temporary and that the ocean belonged to something else. Keene doesn't fish anymore. He sold his gear and moved inland, got a job at a warehouse in Portland. Said he was done with the water. I understand. Some things you see you can't unsee. Some sounds you hear you can't unhear. Eldon still works. Still takes his boat out 6 nights a week. But he won't talk about that night. If you bring it up, he changes the subject. Acts like it never happened. Maybe that's his way of dealing with it. Pretend it was nothing. Just equipment malfunction and tired minds playing tricks. But I know what I saw on that sonar screen. I know what I felt through the hull. And I know that hole in the net wasn't made by any fish or any rock or any piece of ocean debris. Something cut its way out of our net 300 meters down in water so dark and cold that most living things can't survive there. Something that could have taken us if it wanted to. But it didn't. It just let us know it was there. And then it went back down into the deep where it came from. I think about that sometimes. Wonder what's down there at the bottom of the ocean, where no light reaches, and the pressure would crush a man in seconds. Wonder what lives in that darkness, what hunts in those depths. The ocean is the last unexplored place on Earth. Deeper than Everest is tall, darker than any cave. And we swim on the surface of it like insects on a pond, thinking we understand it because we've caught some fish and mapped some trenches, but we don't understand it. We don't know what's down there, and maybe we shouldn't. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Maybe some things should remain unknown. The net with the hole in it is in a storage locker at the harbor. Eldon kept it, said he wanted to have it analyzed, but he never did. I think he's afraid of what the analysis might show. Or more likely, what it won't show. Because how do you explain something that can't be explained? How do you tell people about something that leaves no evidence except a perfect circle cut in a net and a memory that won't go away? You don't. You just keep fishing. Keep going out into the dark water and bringing back what you can catch and trying not to think about what you can't. Trying not to remember that moment when the sonar showed something rising toward you from the deep. Trying not to feel that vibration coming up through the hull like a voice, speaking in a language you don't want to understand. Because understanding means accepting, and accepting means admitting that we're not alone out here. That something else lives in these waters. Something old and patient and utterly inhuman. Something that watches from the depths and sometimes, for reasons we'll never know, decides to let us know it's there. I still go out, still drop my nets into the dark water and wait for them to fill with fish. Still stand on the deck at 3 a.m. when the world is silent and black, and the ocean stretches away in every direction like an endless void. But I don't look at the sonar the same way anymore. Every shadow on that screen makes me wonder. Every strange reading makes me tense. And every sound from below makes me remember that night when something down there grabbed our net and held it, and then let it go after cutting a hole that shouldn't exist. The ocean gives and the ocean takes. That's what old fishermen say. But I don't think that's quite right. I think the ocean tolerates us, lets us take what we need as long as we don't push too far, don't look too deep, don't ask too many questions, and as long as we remember that we're visitors here, not masters, that no matter how many fish we catch, or how well we know the currents and the tides, we're still just temporary intruders in a world that belongs to something else. Something that lives in the deep water and sometimes rises toward the surface. Something that can cut through steel cable like paper and disappear before you can see what it is. Something that makes sounds too low for human ears to properly hear, but that your body understands anyway. Sounds that say, "I'm here, I see you, and I'm letting you go this time. But there might not be a next time." That's what I think about when I'm alone in the dark. What if one night that thing doesn't let go? What if one night it decides that instead of cutting a hole in the net and leaving, it comes up with the net? What then? I don't have an answer. None of us do. We just hope it doesn't happen. Hope that whatever's down there stays down there. Hope that the unspoken agreement between us and the ocean holds. They stay in the deep. We stay on the surface and everybody pretends they don't know about each other. But we do know. After that night, I know. There's something in the deep water off the coast. Something large enough to hold a fishing net against a powered winch. Something smart enough to cut its way free. Something patient enough to let us live. And I hope I never see it again. Hope that sonar screen stays clear and that low vibration never comes up through the hull again. Hope that when I pull my nets up, they come up whole with nothing but fish inside. Because the alternative is too frightening to think about. The alternative is that one night the net will come up and something else will come with it. Something from the deep where no light reaches. Something that's been down there longer than humans have been on this planet. Something that we're not equipped to understand or fight or even properly see. The ocean is patient. Whatever lives down there is patient. And I think we've been very, very lucky that our encounter ended the way it did. With a cut net and a strange sonar reading and a memory that won't fade. It could have been so much worse. It could have been final. But it wasn't. This time. And I take that as a warning. Stay away from those coordinates. Don't drop your nets that deep. Don't look too hard at what the sonar shows you. Don't ask questions about things you find that don't make sense. Just fish the surface waters and take what you're given and be grateful that you're allowed to leave. Because permission can be revoked. The ocean's tolerance isn't infinite. And somewhere down in the dark water, something is waiting. Something that cut a perfect circle in our net and then went back down into the depths. Something that knows we're here, something that's watching. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the water is still, and the stars are hidden by clouds and I'm alone on the deck with just the sound of the motor and the waves, I wonder if it's rising again, coming up from the deep to see what we're doing on its ocean. Coming up to remind us that this isn't our world. It's just a place we're allowed to visit, for now. That's the thought that keeps me awake. Not what I saw, but what I didn't see. Not what happened, but what could have happened. Not the net that came back, but what might come back next time. Because there's always a next time. The ocean doesn't forget. And whatever lives in its depths, I don't think it forgets either. So I fish, and I watch, and I remember. Remember the sound of the sonar when that mass appeared on the screen. Remember the feeling of the drum spinning on its own, feeding line into the dark water. Remember the perfect circle, cut in the net, like something burned through it. Remember the low vibration coming up through the hull from somewhere far below. And I hope I never remember more than that. Hope that what I've seen is all I'll ever see, because I don't want to know what else is down there. Don't want to find out what it looks like or what it wants, or why it held our net and then let it go. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. The ocean is deep and dark and full of things we don't understand. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe we're not supposed to understand. Maybe we're just supposed to take what we're given, respect what we don't know, and hope that the things in the deep stay in the deep. Because if they don't, if they ever decide to come up and stay up, I don't think we'll like what we find. I don't think we'll survive what we learn. And I don't think the ocean will give us a second chance. But for now, the water is quiet. The sonar is clear, and the nets come up full of fish and nothing else. For now, whatever's down there is staying down. For now, we're safe. The storm had passed 3 hours ago. Now the Pacific lay smooth and oily under a sky clearing toward dawn. I'm Silas Kaimana, and I've worked these waters long enough to know that the calm after a storm is when you find the strangest things. The wind had blown hard from the west for 2 days straight, churning the ocean into mountains of gray water that made fishing impossible. We'd ridden it out in a sheltered cove, my boat tied to every available anchor point, waiting for the weather to break. Now we were back on the water, running our lines, checking what the storm had done to our gear. Olin Tamada was below in the engine room, making sure the rough seas hadn't loosened anything important. The motor sounded good, steady and strong, but Olin didn't trust anything he hadn't personally inspected. Kaiiho Paranara was in the galley preparing breakfast, the smell of coffee and fried fish mixing with the salt air and diesel exhaust. Normal morning sounds, normal morning smells. Everything felt normal except for the weight of the catch we'd just pulled up. The net had been heavier than it should be, not by much, but enough that I'd noticed, enough that the winch had strained more than usual. When the net came aboard and spilled its contents across the deck, I saw why. Mixed in with the usual rockfish and lingcod were dozens of deep-water fish, types that normally stayed below 300 meters. Ratfish with their venomous spines, grenadiers with their tapering tails, even a few hagfish coiling in the pile like headless snakes. The storm must have stirred up the depths, brought cold water to the surface along with everything living in it. Kaiiho came up from the galley with coffee and stood looking at the catch. "That's a lot of bottom feeders," he said. "Storm must have really churned things up." I nodded, sorting through the pile, throwing back what we couldn't sell. The ratfish went overboard, the hagfish too. We kept the grenadiers because there was a small market for them, and all the rockfish because they were always worth money. As I worked, my hands touching the cold, slimy bodies, I found something that made me stop. It was attached to one of the larger rockfish, buried in its gills. At first I thought it was a piece of kelp or maybe a parasitic worm, but when I pulled it free and held it up in the deck lights, I saw it wasn't either of those things. It looked like a finger. Not exactly like a human finger, but close enough to make my skin crawl. It was about 4 inches long, pale gray, with what looked like a nail or maybe a claw at the tip. The texture was wrong though, too smooth, like plastic or rubber instead of skin. And it was cold, colder than anything pulled from the ocean should be. "What is that?" Kaiiho asked. "Don't know," I said. I turned it over in my hand, examining it. There were joints, 3 of them, just like a finger should have. But the proportions were off, too long, too thin. Some kind of deep-water creature, maybe. Storm brought up all kinds of weird stuff. Kaiiho didn't look convinced. "You ever seen anything like that before?" "No," I admitted. "But the ocean's full of things nobody's seen before." I was about to throw it overboard when Olin came up from below. He looked at what I was holding and his face changed. Not scared exactly, but troubled. "Where'd you find that?" "In the gills of that rockfish." I pointed at the fish in question. now lying separated from the pile. Olin took the thing from my hand and examined it closely. He squeezed it, bent it, held it up to the light. "This isn't from any fish I know," he said finally. "This is from something else." "Like what?" He shrugged and handed it back to me. "I don't want to guess, but I think you should keep it. Show it to somebody who knows about these things." I wrapped the finger-like object in a piece of rag and put it in the wheelhouse. Then we finished sorting the catch and packed everything into the ice tank below deck. The tank was a large insulated space that ran half the length of the boat, filled with crushed ice to keep the fish fresh until we reached port. We shoveled ice over the sorted catch, layer after layer, until everything was buried and cold. The rest of the day passed normally. We ran more lines, pulled up more fish. None as strange as the first catch, but all good quality. The weather held fair, the wind staying light from the northwest. By evening, we had a decent haul and decided to run through the night, try for one more good set before heading back to port in the morning. Kai-Iho made dinner. We ate in the cabin, passing around plates of fish and rice, drinking coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long and tasted burnt. The conversation was normal, work talk, complaining about prices and fuel costs and the new regulations that made it harder to fish every year. But underneath the normal talk, I could feel something else. A tension that hadn't been there before. Olin kept glancing at the floor, at the hatch that led down to the hold where the ice tank sat. Kai-Iho ate without his usual appetite, pushing food around his plate. "You okay?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said, "just tired. Storm takes it out of you." I didn't believe him, but I didn't push. We cleaned up the dishes, and Kai-Iho went to his bunk. Olin checked the engine one more time, and then he went to his bunk too. That left me alone in the cabin with the radio and the instruments, and the sound of the motor thrumming through the hall. It was just after 3 a.m. when I heard the noise from below. A thud, muffled and heavy, like something had fallen in the hold. I stood up and listened. The motor made it hard to hear details, but I was sure I'd heard something. I waited, watching the floor, waiting to see if the sound would repeat. It did, another thud, harder this time. Definitely coming from below, from the hold, from the ice tank. I opened the hatch and looked down into the darkness. The smell of ice and fish and salt water came up strong. I grabbed a flashlight and descended the ladder, my feet finding the rungs by memory. The hold was cold, much colder than the cabin above. My breath came out in clouds. The flashlight beam swept across the walls, the stacked equipment, the door to the ice tank. The door was shaking. Just slightly, a tremor that made the metal rattle in its frame. As I watched, something hit it from inside. Hard. The whole door jumped in its seals. I stood frozen. The ice tank door was designed to open from the inside in case someone got trapped, but it was heavy, insulated, not easy to move. Whatever was hitting it was doing it with force. Enough force to make the door jump. Enough force to make me not want to open it and see what was in there. Another impact. The door bent slightly inward. I could see the metal flexing, see the seals straining. Whatever was in the ice tank was big, and it was trying to get out. I climbed back up the ladder fast and sealed the hatch. My hands were shaking. I stood in the cabin trying to think. The catch was in the ice tank. Fish, some of them big, but none of them big enough or strong enough to hit the door like that. Unless something else had gotten in there. Unless, when we'd been sorting the catch and packing the ice, something had been mixed in that we'd missed. Something alive. Olin appeared from his bunk, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong, "Something's in the ice tank," I said. "It's hitting the door." He looked at me like I was crazy. Then he heard it. a dull boom from below. The floor shook slightly. Kaiho came out of his bunk, looking scared. "What was that?" "Ice tank," Olin said. He was already moving, pulling on his boots, grabbing a flashlight. "Could be the catch settled wrong. Ice shifted." But I could see he didn't believe that any more than I did. We opened the hatch together and went down into the hold. The three of us stood in the cold, looking at the ice tank door. It wasn't moving now. Everything was quiet except for the motor and the sound of water against the hull. "Maybe it was ice settling," Kaiho said. "Happens sometimes when the door exploded outward. Not opened, exploded. The seals tore free, and the insulated panel flew across the hold, missing Kaiho by inches and crashing into the far wall. Ice poured out of the opening, chunks of it sliding across the floor along with fish and meltwater. And in the cloud of cold air that billowed out of the tank, I saw something move. It was fast. Too fast to see clearly. A shape in the darkness, pale and slick, about the size of a person but wrong somehow. Proportioned wrong, moving wrong. It flashed across the hold and disappeared behind the stacked equipment in the corner. The three of us stood there staring, none of us willing to move toward where it had gone. "What the hell was that?" Olin whispered. "I don't know," I said. But I was thinking about the finger I'd found in the rockfish's gills. The too smooth texture, the wrong proportions. And I was thinking that maybe that finger hadn't been alone when it got caught in our net. We backed toward the ladder, keeping our flashlights pointed at the corner where the thing had disappeared. The hold was a maze of shadows, too many places for something to hide. The equipment, the spare nets, the coiled lines, all of it creating darkness that our lights couldn't fully penetrate. "We need to get it off the boat," Olin said. "Open the deck hatch and drive it up." "And if it doesn't want to go?" Kaiho asked. Nobody had an answer for that. We climbed back up the ladder and sealed the hatch. I could feel the thing down there, moving in the darkness, searching for a way out, or maybe just trying to understand where it was. The ice tank had been cold, close to freezing, the same temperature as the deep water where it must have come from. Now it was in the warmer air of the hold, confused and probably scared and definitely dangerous. I tried to think. We had weapons on board, a flare gun, some knives, nothing that would be much use against something that could tear through a sealed door. The smart thing would be to call the Coast Guard, explain the situation, get help. But what would I tell them? That something from our catch was alive in the hold and we didn't know what it was? They'd think I was drunk or crazy. "We could flood the hold," Olin said. "Open the seacocks, let water in. It came from the ocean, maybe it'll swim out." "And sink the boat?" I said. "The pumps can't keep up with the seacocks. Better than having that thing come up here." He had a point. But I wasn't ready to sink my boat. Not yet. Not unless there was no other choice. We spent the next hour listening to the sounds from below. Scraping, like something was climbing the walls. Splashing, like it was moving through the spilled ice water. Once, a sound that might have been breathing, heavy and wet, coming from right below the hatch. Kaiho made coffee. None of us wanted it, but we drank it anyway, sitting in the cabin, watching the floor, waiting. The radio crackled with normal traffic. Other boats calling in their positions, sharing information about the catch. Everything normal out there. Just us sitting in the darkness with something inhuman in the hold below. "We should head for port," Kaiho said. "Get there fast. Open the hatches, let it run." "And if it runs into town?" Olin asked. "If someone gets hurt?" That stopped the conversation. We couldn't risk it. Whatever was down there, we'd brought it up from the deep water. It was our responsibility, our problem. The sky was getting light when I made the decision. We'd open the deck hatch, the big one that let you load heavy equipment directly into the hold. We'd use the lights and noise to try to drive whatever was down there back out into the ocean. If it didn't work, if the thing came up on deck instead of going overboard, we'd figure out the next step then. We prepared everything, positioned the boat so the deck hatch opened over deep water, set up lights pointing down into the hold, got the boat hook ready in case we needed to push something back. Then Olin and I lifted the hatch cover while Kai Iho stood ready with the lights. The hold below was trashed. Ice everywhere, fish scattered and torn, equipment knocked over. In the far corner, I could see something crouched behind the spare nets. It was pale, almost white, slick with meltwater or maybe something else. It had arms, long ones, too long for its body. And when the light hit it, it made a sound I'd never heard before. High-pitched, almost musical, but with an edge that made your teeth hurt. It moved, faster than anything that size should move, straight across the hold toward the ladder. I thought it was going to climb up, come into the cabin where we were. But at the last second, it changed direction and dove through the open hatch, hitting the water with barely a splash. We rushed to the rail and looked down, but there was nothing to see. Just dark water and the white line of our wake. Whatever it had been, it was gone. We stood there for a long time, none of us speaking. Finally, Olin said, "What do we tell people?" "Nothing," I said. "We tell them nothing. Who would believe us?" We spent the rest of the morning cleaning up the hold. The door to the ice tank was destroyed, torn from its hinges by something that shouldn't have had that kind of strength. We threw it overboard along with the ruined catch. The whole haul, gone. Thousands of dollars of fish, unsellable now that they'd been torn and scattered and God knows what else. When we got to port, we unloaded what little we'd saved from earlier sets. Other fishermen asked why we were back so early, why we looked so tired. We told them we'd had equipment failure, needed to get the ice tank repaired. They accepted it. Boats broke down all the time. Nobody questioned it. I still have the finger. It's in a jar of alcohol in my garage, preserved but not explained. I've shown it to a few people. Marine biologists, fisheries experts. They all say the same thing. They don't know what it is. It looks like it might be from some kind of deep-sea octopus or squid, but the structure is wrong. The joints don't match anything known. I don't fish those waters anymore. Not after a storm. Not when the deep water gets churned up and brings God knows what to the surface. Olin sold his share in the boat and moved to California. Kai Iho still fishes, but he won't talk about that night. Acts like it never happened. But I know what I saw. I know what was in that ice tank. Something from the deep water where no light reaches and the pressure would crush a man. Something that got caught in our net by accident. Something that survived being packed in ice for hours. Something strong enough to tear through a sealed door. And I think about the finger. Just the finger, not attached to anything. Just floating in the gills of a rockfish. Which means whatever it came from was torn apart by something bigger. Something that tears fingers off things that can break through steel doors. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not what was in the ice tank, but what that thing was afraid of. What lives down there, in the deep, that even something like that has to fear. What hunts in the darkness where the pressure would kill us instantly. The ocean is deeper than we think. Darker than we imagine. And full of things that should stay there, in the cold and the pressure and the endless night. Things that only come to the surface by accident, when storms churn the water and mix the depths with the shallows. Things with too long fingers and too much strength. Things that make sounds like music and pain combined. Things that move faster than they should and disappear into dark water without a trace. I still fish. Still drop my nets into the Pacific and bring up what I catch. But I check every fish now. Look carefully at what's in the gills, what's caught in the mouths, what's tangled in the net. Because I don't want to bring something like that aboard again. Don't want to wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of something hitting a door from inside. Don't want to see that pale shape moving in the darkness of the hold. The ocean gives us fish, and we're grateful. But sometimes it gives us other things. Things we're not supposed to see. Things that belong in the deep where they can't reach us, and we can't reach them. And when we accidentally bring one of those things to the surface, when we pack it in ice thinking it's dead, we learn that the ocean's gifts sometimes come with costs we can't afford to pay. That ice tank door is at the bottom of the Pacific now, along with all the torn fish and the ruined catch and the evidence of what was in there. Nobody knows about it except the three of us, and we don't talk about it. Don't share the story, don't try to explain, because how do you explain something that can't be explained? How do you describe something that moves too fast to see clearly? How do you tell people about the sound it made, that musical, painful sound that seemed to come from somewhere other than its throat? You don't. You just remember. Remember the feeling of standing in that hold with ice water around your feet and something pale and wrong crouched in the corner. Remember the sound of the door exploding outward. Remember seeing it dive back into the ocean like it had always belonged there. Like the boat, the hold, the ice tank. All of it was just a brief nightmare before returning to the comfortable pressure of the deep. I wonder sometimes if it made it back down to where it came from, if it survived the warmth of the surface water and the trauma of being caught and frozen. Or if it died somewhere in the depths, just another mystery the ocean swallowed without explanation. But then I remember how fast it moved, how strong it was, how it didn't hesitate before diving back into the dark water. And I think it probably survived. Think it's down there now, in the cold pressure that would kill us, living its life in darkness like nothing happened. And maybe that's worse. Maybe knowing it's down there, that things like it are down there, is worse than if it had died, because it means the deep water isn't empty. It's full. Full of things that can survive being frozen, things that can tear through steel, things that look wrong and move wrong and make sounds that hurt to hear. The Pacific is full of boats. Fishermen working the surface, taking what they can catch, feeding their families and paying their bills. And underneath all those boats, underneath all that activity and life and normality, the real ocean exists. The deep ocean where the pressure increases with every meter and the light disappears and the temperature drops to just above freezing. That's where they live. The things like what was in our ice tank. That's their world. And sometimes, when the storms churn the water or currents shift the depths, they come closer to the surface than they should. They get caught in nets, or tangled in lines, or swept up in schools of regular fish. And fishermen like me pull them aboard without knowing what we've caught until it's too late. The smart ones throw them back fast. Don't look too close, don't ask questions. Just cut the line and let whatever it is sink back down to where it belongs. But sometimes you don't realize what you've caught until you've already packed it in ice, already sealed it in the tank, already committed to bringing it back to port. That's when you learn. That's when the door starts shaking. That's when you hear the sound of something that shouldn't be there trying to get out. And that's when you understand that the ocean has rules, has boundaries, has regions that are meant to stay separate. We broke those boundaries, brought something from the deep into our world of air and light and warmth. And it didn't belong here, couldn't survive here for long. So it went back, tore through a steel door and dove back into the water like a fish released from a hook. But in those hours, when it was aboard, in the cold darkness of the hold, I think we saw something that most people will never see. Something that lives in a place so hostile that humans can't go there without machines and pressure suits. Something adapted to a world completely different from ours. And it was terrified. I could see that in how it moved, how it hid in the corner behind the nets. It didn't want to be there any more than we wanted it there. It was lost, confused, trapped in an environment that was wrong for it. The temperature was wrong, the pressure was wrong, everything was wrong. So it fought, used its strength to break free, and then it went home. I respect that. Even though it scared the hell out of me, even though it cost me thousands of dollars in lost catch and damaged equipment, I respect it. Because it had every right to fight. Every right to try to get back to where it belonged. And I hope it made it. Hope it's down there now, back in the deep where things like it live. Back in the darkness and cold and pressure that would kill me. Back where it's safe from fishermen and their nets and their ice tanks. Because the alternative is that it's still up here somewhere. In the shallows, trying to survive in water that's too warm and too bright. Struggling to find food, to avoid predators, to adapt to a world it was never meant to inhabit. That would be worse. That would mean our mistake had consequences beyond just one scary night. That would mean we'd changed something, damaged something, brought something into our world that can't go back. But I don't think that's what happened. I think it made it back down to the deep. Think it's there now, living its strange life in the darkness. A survivor with a story to tell if things like that tell stories. And maybe it does tell stories. Maybe it warns others of its kind about the nets that come from above, about the boats that drift on the surface, about how you can get caught and pulled up and packed in ice and taken to a place where the pressure is wrong and the temperature is wrong and everything is terrifying and alien. Maybe that's what that musical sound was. Not fear, not pain, but communication. Warning us or calling for help or trying to tell us something we couldn't understand because we're not from its world. We'll never know. It's gone now, back to the deep where it came from. And we're here on the surface, going about our work, trying to forget what we saw in the hold that night. But I haven't forgotten. Can't forget. Because I still have that finger in a jar. Still have the memory of seeing that pale shape move across the hold faster than anything should move. Still have the sound in my head. That high, musical, painful sound that made my teeth hurt. And I know that it's down there, along with others like it. Living in the deep water where we can't go. Living lives we can't imagine. Existing in a world so different from ours that we might as well be on different planets. The ocean keeps its secrets, keeps them in the deep where the pressure prevents us from looking too close. And maybe that's good. Maybe we're not supposed to know what's down there. Maybe the separation between their world and ours is meant to stay intact. Because when it breaks, when storms or accidents or bad luck brings them into our world, nobody benefits. They're terrified and lost. We're terrified and confused. And the only solution is for them to go back down where they belong, and for us to stay up here where we belong. The surface and the deep. Two worlds separated by depth and pressure and darkness. And the boundary between them is supposed to stay closed. Supposed to keep us apart. Supposed to protect both sides from the terror of the other. But sometimes the boundary breaks. Sometimes a storm churns the water deep enough to bring up things from below. Sometimes a net goes deeper than it should. Sometimes a fisherman pulls up a catch and doesn't notice what else he's brought aboard until it's too late. And then we learn that we share this ocean with things we don't understand. Things that look wrong and move wrong and make sounds we can't process. Things that belong in a different world but occasionally, accidentally, briefly, enter ours. That's what happened to us. That's what was in the ice tank. A visitor from the deep, caught by accident. Brought to a place it didn't belong. Trying desperately to get back home, and it succeeded. Broke through the door and dove back into the dark water and disappeared. Going home to the deep where it's safe from fishermen and their nets and their ice. Going home to where it belongs, and leaving us here on the surface, changed by what we saw, unable to forget, unable to explain, unable to prove that any of it really happened. Just 3 fishermen with a damaged ice tank and a story nobody would believe. Just another strange night on the Pacific Ocean where strange things happen all the time, and nobody talks about them because talking makes you sound crazy. But it happened. I know it happened. The broken door proves it. The ruined catch proves it. The finger in the jar proves it. Something was in that ice tank. Something from the deep water. Something that shouldn't have been there but was. And when it broke free and went back to where it belonged, it took with it any chance of proving what it was. Now it's just a memory. A story I don't tell, a secret I keep because sharing it would accomplish nothing except making people think I've lost my mind. So I fish, and I watch. And I remember the sound of that door exploding. Remember the pale shape moving in the darkness. Remember the feeling of standing in the cold hold knowing something inhuman was crouched in the corner watching me. And I'm careful now, more careful than I was before, because I know what can happen when you're not paying attention. When you pack your catch without checking carefully. When you seal something in the ice tank that isn't dead, isn't fish, isn't anything you ever want to meet again. The ocean is full of mysteries. Some of them we discover and explain. Some of them we discover and can't explain. And some of them discover us when we weren't looking for them. That's what happened in the ice tank. A discovery neither side wanted. A meeting that scared both parties equally. A brief intersection of 2 worlds that were never meant to touch. And now it's over. The thing is back in the deep. We're back on the surface. The boundary between our worlds is intact again. But I'll never forget what happened when that boundary broke. Never forget what I saw. Never forget that sound. Because the ocean doesn't forget either. And somewhere in the deep, something else remembers the night it got caught in a net and packed in ice and had to fight its way back to freedom. Something that now knows we're up here. Knows we drop our nets into its world. Knows we take what we can catch. And maybe it's warning others now. Telling them to avoid our nets, to stay deep where it's safe, to remember that the surface is dangerous and humans are to be feared. Or maybe it's doing the opposite. Maybe it's telling them about the weakness of our boats, the fragility of our doors, how easily we can be hurt if something decides to hurt us. I don't know which. Can't know. Because we can't talk to them, can't communicate, can't explain that it was all an accident. We just have to hope they understand. Hope they stay in the deep where they belong. Hope that the boundary between our worlds stays closed except for the accidental breaches that can't be avoided. Hope that next time we pull up the net, there's nothing in it but fish. The night was clear enough to see stars reflected on the water. I'm Gideon Havelock, 23 years on these boats, and I've learned to trust my instruments more than my eyes. The Pacific at night is too dark, too vast, too easy to get disoriented. But radar doesn't lie. Sonar doesn't lie. They show you what's there even when you can't see it. That's what I believed until that night. Jax Mercer was running the winch, bringing up the 3rd set of the evening. Good catch so far, holds were half full. Risa Hanabusa was at the sonar station, monitoring depth and bottom structure, making sure we weren't drifting into shallow water or over rock formations that could tear our net. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Then the radar beeped. A contact appeared on the screen, bearing 270, distance half a nautical mile. Another boat, according to the radar, moving slowly, maybe drifting or working gear. I looked out the window in that direction but saw nothing. Just darkness and the reflection of stars on calm water. "You see anything to the west?" I called to Jax. He stopped what he was doing and looked. "Nothing. Sky and water. Why?" "Radar's showing a contact. Half-mile out." Jax came into the cabin and looked at the screen. The contact was still there. A solid return. The kind you get from a boat with a metal hull. "Huh," he said. "Position lights must be out." It was possible. Boats sometimes lost their navigation lights. Equipment failed, bulbs burned out. But boats operating at night were supposed to have backup systems, supposed to have lights visible from miles away. This contact showed nothing. No lights, no radio traffic, no indication anyone was out there except for that blip on the radar screen. I switched the radio to channel 16 and made a call. "Vessel bearing 270 from my position, approximately half-mile. This is fishing vessel Northern Star. Do you copy?" Static. I waited 30 seconds and called again. Still nothing. "Maybe they're not monitoring," Jack said. "Everybody monitors 16, I said. "That's the law." Risa came into the cabin holding her coffee. "What's going on?" "Radar contact," I said. "No response to radio." She looked at the screen. "Could be a false return. Sometimes you get them from weather or sea conditions." But the sea was calm. Clear skies, no precipitation, no atmospheric conditions that would cause false radar returns. And the contact was steady, not flickering or jumping around like a phantom return would. It looked solid. It looked real. We watched it for a few minutes. The contact moved slightly, drifting east at maybe half a knot. I tried the radio again, switching through all the working channels, calling out our position and asking if anyone was receiving. Nobody answered. "I don't like this," Jax said. "Boat that close with no lights, no radio, could be in trouble." He was right. Fishing boats went dark for lots of reasons, none of them good. Power failure, fire, flooding, crew incapacitation. If someone was out there in distress, we had a legal and moral obligation to check on them. I changed course, turning the boat toward the radar contact. "Keep watching it," I told Risa. "Let me know if it changes position or disappears." "What if it's not a boat?" she asked. "What else would it be?" She shrugged. "Debris, shipping container. Something floating that's giving a solid return. Possible. The ocean was full of floating junk. But containers usually didn't move on their own, and this contact was definitely moving. We approached slowly, cutting our speed to minimize wake. I kept the spotlight ready but didn't turn it on yet. If someone was out there in trouble, I didn't want to blind them. The radar showed us getting closer. 400 meters, 300, 200. At 100 meters, we should be able to see something even on a dark night. The contact was big enough to show solid on radar, which meant it had to be at least 10 or 15 meters long. You don't miss something that size. But there was nothing. Empty ocean. Calm water reflecting starlight. No boat, no debris, no anything. I turned on the spotlight and swept it across the water where the radar said the contact should be. The beam showed nothing but ocean. Clear, dark, empty. "This doesn't make sense," Jack said. He was looking at the radar screen and then out the window, back and forth, trying to reconcile what the instruments showed with what his eyes saw. Risa checked the sonar. "I'm not getting anything either. Water's clear. No structure. No fish schools. Nothing." The radar contact was still there. According to the screen, it was now less than 50 meters away, almost alongside us, but looking out the window showed nothing. I killed the engine and let the boat drift. In the sudden quiet, with just the sound of water lapping the hull, I could hear my own heartbeat. "Could the radar be malfunctioning?" Jax asked. "I checked it 3 days ago," I said. "Everything was perfect." We sat there for 10 minutes, watching the radar contact that shouldn't exist, looking out at ocean that was empty. Finally, I made the decision to mark the position and move on. Whatever was causing the false return could be investigated in daylight when we had better visibility. I noted the coordinates in the log and resumed our course. The contact disappeared from the radar as soon as we moved away. Just gone. One moment it was there, solid and unmistakable. The next moment, nothing. Clean screen. Empty ocean. That was weird, Jack said. I agreed, but didn't want to dwell on it. Weird things happened at sea. Equipment acted strangely sometimes. You learned to accept the small mysteries and focus on the work. We had nets to run and fish to catch, and none of that would happen if we spent the night chasing radar ghosts. We worked through to midnight without incident. The catch was good, the weather held fair, everything ran smoothly. But I kept glancing at the radar screen, watching for that contact to appear again. It didn't. The screen showed what it should show. Our boat, the coastline to the east, the occasional return from a wave crest or piece of floating kelp. Normal. Everything normal. It was Risa who noticed it first. Just after 3 a.m., she was checking the sonar routine scan to make sure we weren't drifting. She made a sound, half surprise, half confusion. "Gideon, come look at this." I went to the sonar station. The screen showed our boat's hull from below, the distinctive shape of the keel and the shadowy return from the water column underneath. Standard display, except there was something else. Directly below us, at a depth of about 30 meters, was another return. Solid, distinct, the same size and shape as a boat hull. The sonar was showing 2 boats, one on the surface and one underwater, perfectly aligned. "That's not possible," I said. "I know," Risa said. "But look." She adjusted the gain, changed the frequency, cycled through different display modes. The underwater contact remained constant. "It's real. Something's down there." Jax came to look. "Submarine?" "Out here?" I said. "Why would a submarine be under a fishing boat in the middle of nowhere?" But even as I said it, I was checking the depth gauge. 30 meters. Deep enough for a submarine to operate, shallow enough that the sonar could get a clear return. And the shape was right. Cylindrical, smooth, about the same length as our boat. "Could be a whale," Risa said. But she didn't sound convinced. Whales showed up differently on sonar. Organic, flexible, moving. This was solid, rigid, motionless. It sat directly beneath us like it was waiting. I killed the engine. In the sudden silence, I became aware of how quiet the night was. No wind, no waves, just the gentle lap of water and the sound of our breathing. The boat drifted, but the underwater contact drifted with us, maintaining position directly below, not falling behind or pulling ahead, matched to our drift exactly. "It's following us," Jack said. "We're not moving," I said. "It's just maintaining position." "Same thing." He was right. Whatever was down there, it was tracking us, staying directly beneath our hull no matter how we drifted. I tried to think rationally. Submarines did exist in these waters. Military vessels, research boats, maybe even private craft. They had every right to be here. And if one was running exercises, it might show up exactly like this on sonar. Perfectly reasonable explanation. Except submarines didn't run silent directly under fishing boats without identifying themselves. They maintained distance, stayed deep, avoided civilian vessels. They certainly didn't match drift with you for no reason. "I'm going to try the radio again," I said. I switched to the emergency channel and broadcast a call. "Unidentified vessel or submarine maintaining position below fishing vessel Northern Star. This is Northern Star. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." The radio hissed. Static, nothing else. I repeated the call on multiple frequencies. No response. "Check the radar," Risa said. I looked. The radar screen was showing a contact again. Same bearing as before. Same distance. The contact that had disappeared when we moved away from it hours ago. Now it was back. "That's where we saw it before," Jax said. "The coordinates match." I checked the log. He was right. The radar contact was in exactly the same position where we'd seen it earlier, as if it had been waiting there the whole time, invisible to our instruments, and only appeared when we were directly above its underwater counterpart. "I want to leave," Risa said. Her voice was tight. "Right now, I don't care about the catch or the rest of the night. I want to leave." I didn't argue. My instincts were saying the same thing. Whatever was happening here wasn't normal, wasn't natural, wasn't anything I wanted to be part of. I started the engine and engaged the throttle, turning the boat toward the harbor. The underwater contact stayed with us. I watched the sonar as we accelerated, watched the return below maintain perfect position. We were doing 8 knots, too fast for most submarines to match submerged, certainly too fast for anything to maintain exact positioning without active maneuvering. But there it was, directly below us, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. "It's not letting us leave," Jax said. "We're leaving," I said. "Nothing's stopping us." But I increased speed anyway, pushing the engine to 10 knots. The underwater contact kept pace, 11 knots. Still there, 12 knots, straining the engine, burning fuel at a rate that would cost me money I couldn't afford. The contact remained perfectly positioned below us. I looked at the radar. The surface contact was gone again, just disappeared. But on sonar, the underwater shape was clear as day, dark and solid and impossible. "What does it want?" Risa whispered. "I don't know," I said. And I didn't. Was it following us? Hurting us? Just observing? There was no way to know because whatever it wasn't communicating. Wasn't responding to radio calls or showing lights or making any indication of intent. We ran for 30 minutes, the engine howling, the boat pounding through calm water at a speed that wasn't safe for night operations. I didn't care. I wanted distance between us and whatever those coordinates were. Wanted to be somewhere else, anywhere else. Away from radar contacts that shouldn't exist, and underwater shapes that matched our drift perfectly. Finally, the sonar contact disappeared. One moment it was there, solid and clear. The next moment, gone. The screen showed normal returns. Our hull, the water column, the bottom far below. Nothing else. I reduced speed and let the engine return to sustainable RPM. We were 15 nautical miles from where we'd been, halfway to the harbor, in water I knew well. Safe water. Normal water. Water that didn't have impossible things lurking beneath it. "It's gone," Jax said. He sounded relieved. "What was it?" Risa asked. "I don't know," I said again. Because I truly didn't. A submarine that could match speeds it shouldn't be able to match. A whale that showed up like metal on sonar? Some kind of equipment malfunction that affected both radar and sonar simultaneously. None of the explanations made sense. We continued to the harbor without further incident. The sky was getting light by the time we tied up at our slip. Other boats were preparing to head out. Fishermen checking gear and topping off fuel. Normal morning routine. Everything normal, like the last 6 hours hadn't happened. We unloaded the catch without talking about it. What was there to say? That we'd seen something on radar that wasn't there? That something had followed us underwater for 30 minutes? Who would believe that? Who would even want to? 3 days later, another fishing boat reported the same thing. Radar contact with no visual, underwater return on sonar, the contact following them for nearly an hour before disappearing. The Coast Guard investigated and found nothing, called it equipment malfunction, atmospheric conditions, mass hysteria. But I know what I saw, know what the instruments showed, and I know that something is out there in those coordinates, something that appears on radar when it wants to, something that can move underwater faster than it should be able to, something that tracks fishing boats for reasons we can't understand. I don't fish that area anymore. Marked it in my charts as equipment malfunction zone, a place where instruments can't be trusted. Other fishermen have started doing the same. Quietly, without announcing it, we've all agreed to avoid those coordinates. Fish other waters. Work other grounds. Stay away from the place where radar and sonar show things that shouldn't exist. Because the alternative is to accept what we saw. Accept that something is out there. Something that can hide from our eyes but not from our instruments. Something that decides when to be visible and when to vanish. Something that follows fishing boats for no reason we can identify. And I don't want to accept that. Don't want to believe that the Pacific holds things we can't understand. Things that operate by rules we haven't discovered. Don't want to think about what it means that our instruments showed two objects in the same place. One above water and one below, perfectly synchronized. So I don't go back there. Don't test whether it would happen again. Don't try to find explanations or answers or proof. I just fish other waters and tell myself it was equipment failure. Tell myself that radar and sonar can malfunction simultaneously. Tell myself that 30 minutes of impossible tracking was just a glitch in multiple systems. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the cabin at night, I look at the radar screen and wonder what it was that appeared on that screen. Wonder what was below us matching our every movement. Wonder if it's still there, in those coordinates, waiting for the next fishing boat to come along. Waiting to appear on their radar. Waiting to follow them underwater. Waiting to remind us that the ocean holds secrets we can't explain and presences we can't escape. The Pacific is deep and dark and full of things we've never seen, things that don't want to be seen, things that only reveal themselves through instruments that translate invisible signals into shapes on screens. And sometimes those shapes don't make sense. Sometimes the instruments show us things that can't exist, things that follow us through dark water, things that watch from below, things that wait in the deep for reasons only they understand. I think about Risa saying, "What does it want?" And I still don't have an answer. Maybe it doesn't want anything. Maybe it's just there, existing in its own way, unaware that we find it terrifying. Maybe, from its perspective, we're the strange ones. The loud boats on the surface, dropping nets into water that isn't ours, taking fish from depths we can't survive in. Maybe the radar contact is its way of saying, "I'm here, I see you, and you should know I exist even if you can't see me." Or maybe it's something else entirely, something we can't understand because we don't have the framework to understand it. We're surface creatures trying to make sense of something that lives in a completely different environment with completely different rules. All I know for sure is that our instruments don't lie. They showed something that night. Something real enough to generate radar and sonar returns. Something that moved with purpose and intention. Something that chose when to appear and when to disappear. And it's still out there, in those coordinates that I've marked as dangerous. In water that looks empty, but isn't. Waiting for the next boat to come along and discover what we discovered. That the ocean isn't empty. That silence doesn't mean nothing's there. And that sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are the ones our instruments make for us. The ones we can measure but not see. The ones we can track but not escape. The ones that follow us through dark water and then disappear without explanation. Leaving us with nothing but coordinates we avoid and memories we can't share. and the knowledge that somewhere below the surface, in the cold, deep water, something exists that we were never meant to find. The fog came in without warning. One minute I could see the horizon, the next minute I was surrounded by gray thickness that turned the world into a 10-foot bubble. I'm Oren Catalano, and in 17 years of fishing these waters, I've learned that Pacific fog is different from other fog. It doesn't just reduce visibility. It changes sounds, bends light, makes distances impossible to judge. You learn to respect it, or you end up on rocks you thought were miles away. I was alone that night. My usual deckhand had quit the week before, took a job on a bigger boat with better pay. I'd been fishing solo since then, which meant longer hours and more risk, but also meant I didn't have to split the catch. The night had started clear, stars bright enough to navigate by. But around 2 a.m. the fog rolled in, thick and sudden, like someone had dropped a curtain across the ocean. I reduced speed immediately and switched on the navigation lights. The radar showed clear water ahead, no other boats within 5 miles. The depth sounder showed steady bottom at 200 meters. Everything normal except for the visibility. I could hear the motor but couldn't see the bow of my own boat. The spotlight made it worse, just reflecting back off the fog and blinding me. I thought about Fletcher Tolentino then. Old fisherman who'd worked these waters for 40 years before retiring. I'd had coffee with him a week ago and he'd told me about fog. The thick kind, he'd said. The kind that comes in fast and sits heavy. That's when you need to be careful, because sometimes the fog brings things with it. Things that don't belong here. I'd laughed at the time. Fletcher was known for his stories. Elaborate tales that mixed truth with exaggeration in ways that made them entertaining, but unbelievable. But now, sitting in fog so thick I couldn't see my own hands when I held them out, I thought about his words differently. The boat drifted. I'd cut the engine to save fuel, and because there was no point burning diesel when I couldn't see where I was going. The radar showed my position, showed I wasn't drifting toward shore or shallow water. I had hours before dawn. Better to wait it out than risk collision or grounding. That's when I heard the sound. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A low vibration that seemed to originate in the fog itself. Not quite a hum, not quite a groan, somewhere in between. The kind of sound that's more felt than heard, that resonates in your chest and makes your teeth ache slightly. I stood up and listened. The sound continued, steady and low. It didn't change in pitch or volume, just that constant vibration that seemed to fill the air around the boat. I checked the engine, but it was off, checked the radio, but it was silent. The sound was coming from outside, from the fog. Bishop Araneta had told me about sounds in the fog. We'd worked together 3 seasons back before he'd transferred to Alaska Boats. You hear things that aren't there, he'd said. Engines when there are no boats. Voices when there's no one around. The fog plays tricks. Carries sound from miles away and makes it seem close. Or makes close things seem far. You can't trust your ears in heavy fog. But this sound didn't seem like it was being carried from somewhere else. It seemed to be the all around me, surrounding the boat, pressing in from every direction. I grabbed the spotlight and turned it on, sweeping the beam through the fog. The light barely penetrated. Maybe 15 feet of visibility before the beam disappeared into gray opacity. But in that brief arc of illumination, I saw something that made me freeze. The fog was moving. Not drifting with wind, but moving against it. Swirling in patterns that didn't make meteorological sense. And in those swirls, in the spaces between the gray masses, I saw impressions. Shapes that appeared for a second and then dissolved. Nothing clear enough to identify. Just the suggestion of form. of something solid hiding in vapor. The sound changed, grew louder, deeper. Now it had an edge to it, like metal scraping against metal, like something massive moving slowly through water. I could feel it vibrating through the hull, coming up through my feet. I tried the radio. Any vessel in the vicinity of my position, this is fishing vessel Mariana. Can anyone read me? Static. I tried again on different channels. Nothing but hiss and crackle. The radio was working, but no one was responding. Either I was alone out here or the fog was blocking transmission. Then I saw the light. It appeared in the water about 30 meters off the starboard side. Red light, deep crimson, glowing beneath the surface. Not bright exactly, but noticeable. Visible even through the fog that obscured everything else. The light didn't move, didn't pulse or flicker. Just sat there in the water, steady and wrong. I cut the spotlight and watched. In the darkness, the red glow was even more apparent. It seemed to come from deep water, maybe 20 or 30 meters down. Too deep for any diver with regular equipment. Too deep for most underwater lights to remain visible from the surface. The sound grew louder. That grinding, scraping vibration. And the red light began to move. Slowly, rising through the water column, coming closer to the surface. I could see it more clearly now. See that it wasn't a point source but a diffuse glow, like light filtering through something translucent. I started the engine. The motor caught immediately, and I was grateful for that because I wanted to leave. Wanted to be anywhere but here, watching red light rise from depths that shouldn't contain anything that glows. I engaged the throttle and turned away from the light. The fog thickened. I didn't think that was possible, but it happened. Visibility dropped from 10 feet to 5, then to nothing. I could barely see the wheel in front of me. The radar showed clear water, but what I was experiencing said otherwise. It felt like I was moving through something solid, like the fog had mass and resistance. The red light appeared again, this time off the port side, at the same depth, rising at the same speed, as if it had circled around underneath me while I was trying to move away. Or as if there was more than one light, more than one source of that crimson glow. I stopped the boat. The engine idled, the radar showed empty ocean. The depth sounder showed steady bottom. But the red light kept rising. And the sound, that grinding vibration, grew louder until I could hear individual tones in it. Like something huge was flexing, metal plates sliding against each other, cables under tension creaking and groaning. Fletcher had mentioned lights. Sometimes in the fog you see things, he'd said. Lights that shouldn't be there, colors that don't belong. And if you see them, you should leave. Don't investigate. Don't try to figure out what they are, just leave. But I couldn't leave. The fog was too thick. Moving blind was more dangerous than staying put. So I stood in the cabin, watching the red light rise, listening to that impossible sound, waiting for something to happen. The light broke the surface. Not dramatically, not with any splash or disturbance. It just appeared, level with the water, a glowing circle of deep red, maybe 3 feet across, sitting in the fog like a window into something that burned far away. I grabbed the spotlight and aimed it at the red light. When I flicked it on, the red light disappeared. Just gone, instantly. But in the brief illumination before it vanished, I saw something else, something in the water where the light had been, a shape, cylindrical, smooth, dark, there and gone in a second. I turned off the spotlight. The red light reappeared, exactly where it had been, as if my light had done nothing except temporarily hide it. But I knew I'd seen something physical, something that occupied space in the water. The sound stopped. Total silence except for my engine idling and the gentle lap of water against the hull. The red light remained, steady and unblinking, watching me or waiting or just existing for reasons I couldn't understand. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me in the cabin, the light in the water, both of us motionless in fog that showed no signs of lifting. It felt like hours, but my watch said it was only minutes. Time felt wrong, elastic, like the fog was distorting more than just visibility. Then the light began to sink, slowly, steadily, descending back into the deep water it had come from. I watched it go, watched the crimson glow fade as depth and fog swallowed it. And as it disappeared, the sound started again. That grinding vibration, but fainter now, receding, moving away into distance and depth. The fog began to lift around 4 a.m., not all at once, but gradually. Visibility increased from 5 feet to 10, then 20, then 50. By the time the sun rose, the fog was mostly gone, just wisps of gray clinging to the water in patches. I checked my position. The GPS showed I'd drifted maybe half a mile during the night. Nothing unusual for calm conditions. The radar showed clear water in all directions. Other fishing boats were appearing on the screen, morning crews heading out to work their grounds. Everything normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. Something more than just fog and strange lights. The sound I'd heard wasn't the sound of weather or water. It was mechanical, manufactured, intentional. And the red light wasn't bioluminescence or reflection or any natural phenomenon I'd ever learned about. I radioed the other boats nearby, asked if anyone else had experienced heavy fog during the night. Several confirmed they had, that it had come in fast around 2 a.m. and lifted just before dawn. But when I asked if anyone had heard unusual sounds or seen lights in the water, they said no. Just fog, just normal heavy Pacific fog. I wanted to believe them. Wanted to believe that what I'd experienced was some kind of sensory distortion. Fog playing tricks with sound and light, creating impressions that weren't real. But I'd seen that shape in the water when I turned on the spotlight. Seen something solid and dark and wrong. Fletcher Tolentino was at the harbor when I tied up. He took one look at my face and knew something had happened. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. Saw what? The red light in the fog. I stared at him. "You know about this?" He nodded slowly. "Happens sometimes. Not often. Maybe once every few years. Heavy fog rolls in and brings something with it. Something that glows red under the water. Something that makes sounds like metal moving. What is it?" Fletcher shrugged. "I don't know. Nobody does. I've talked to other fishermen who've seen it. All of us have different theories, but none of them make sense. Some think it's a submarine, experimental Navy craft running secret tests. Others think it's something natural, some kind of deep-sea phenomenon we haven't documented yet. What do you think?" Fletcher looked out at the ocean, at the last wisps of fog disappearing into morning light. "I think the ocean is old," he said. "Older than us, older than our boats, older than our understanding. And I think some things live in it that don't want to be found, that only show themselves when conditions are right, when fog is thick enough to hide them, when darkness is deep enough to keep their secrets." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be a rational explanation. But standing there on the dock, remembering the sound that had vibrated through my hull, remembering the red light rising from depths that should have been empty, I couldn't find the words. "Did it hurt you?" Fletcher asked. "No, it just was there, watching." "Then you were lucky, because I've heard stories about fishermen who got too close, who tried to investigate instead of waiting. He trailed off. They what? They didn't come back. I sold my boat 2 months later. Told people I was retiring early, that I wanted to do something else with my life. The truth was, I couldn't go back out there. Couldn't face another night of fishing. Couldn't risk being caught in that fog again. Couldn't handle the possibility of seeing that red light rise from the deep. Bishop Araneta called me when he heard I'd sold the boat. "What happened?" he asked. I told him. All of it. The fog, the sound, the red light, the shape I'd seen for just a second when I turned on the spotlight. He listened without interrupting. "I believe you," he said when I finished. "And I'm glad you got out. Because I saw it too. 3 years ago, different coordinates but the same thing. Red light in the fog sounds like machinery running underwater. I didn't tell anyone because who would believe it?" "Fletcher believes it," I said. "He says other fishermen have seen it too." "Yeah," Bishop said. "And you notice how all of them are old? Because the young ones who see it don't get old. They go back out there thinking they can figure out what it is, thinking they're brave or smart enough to solve the mystery, and they don't come back." I think about that a lot now. About the fishermen who didn't come back, who saw the red light and decided to investigate instead of wait, who maybe got too close or tried to follow it down, or did something that made whatever was generating that light respond in a way that wasn't peaceful. I think about the sound, that grinding mechanical vibration, and I wonder what would make a sound like that underwater. What kind of mechanism would operate in the deep ocean, hidden by fog, announcing its presence with red light that rises and falls for no reason anyone can explain? Sometimes I dream about it. Dream that I'm back on my boat in the fog, and the red light is rising again. But in the dream, I don't wait. I drive toward it, close the distance, try to see what it really is, and just before I wake up, I see something huge moving beneath the surface. Something that makes my boat look like a toy. Something that generates red light not as a warning but as a lure. Then I wake up sweating, grateful that it's just a dream. Grateful that I'm on land where fog can't trap me and red lights can't find me. But sometimes, on foggy mornings when I'm walking near the harbor, I hear sounds carried on the wind. Low vibrations that might be distant machinery or might be something else. And I see lights reflected in the water, red glows that might be boat lights or buoys or something rising from the deep. And I remember Fletcher's words. The ocean is old, and some things in it don't want to be found. I believe that now. Believe that the Pacific holds secrets that are meant to stay secret. Things that only reveal themselves when fog provides cover, when darkness hides details, when conditions make it impossible to see clearly or prove what you've witnessed. Things that glow red in deep water. Things that make sounds like mechanical behemoths. Things that rise slowly toward the surface and then sink back down, leaving no evidence except memories and fear. The fog still comes, heavy Pacific fog that rolls in without warning and sits on the water like a blanket. Fishermen still go out in it, trusting their instruments, believing they understand the risks. And sometimes, very rarely, one of them sees something. Red light rising from below. Sounds that shouldn't exist in water that deep. Most of them do what I did. They wait it out. They leave when they can. They don't talk about it except maybe to other fishermen who've seen it too. They mark those coordinates as bad luck zones and they fish somewhere else. But some of them don't wait. Some of them investigate. And those fishermen become statistics. Lost at sea. Equipment failure. Navigational error, tragic accident. The Coast Guard searches and finds nothing. Just empty ocean and questions with no answers. Because how do you explain to investigators that a boat disappeared while chasing a red light that shouldn't exist? How do you tell them that the ocean holds things that glow in the dark and make sounds like massive machines? How do you make them understand that fog sometimes brings visitors from depths we can't reach? You don't. You just file the report and mark the coordinates and hope that other fishermen will be smart enough to avoid that area when the fog rolls in. Hope that they'll recognize the warning signs and turn away before the red light rises. Hope that they'll survive to become old fishermen like Fletcher, who know the ocean's secrets and don't share them except with others who've learned the same hard lessons. I'm one of those fishermen now, young enough to remember clearly, old enough to know I was lucky. And if another fisherman comes to me asking about fog and strange lights, I'll tell them what Fletcher told me. If you see red light in the water during heavy fog, don't investigate. Don't try to understand it. Just wait for the fog to lift, and then leave that area and never go back. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some things in the ocean are meant to stay unknown. And if they're smart, they'll listen. They'll remember the warning when the fog rolls in, and the red light appears and the sounds start vibrating through their hull. They'll wait it out like I did, and they'll leave. And they'll live to become old fishermen with the stories they only tell to others who will understand. But if they're not smart, if they're curious or brave or stupid, they'll do what others have done. They'll move toward the light. They'll try to solve the mystery. They'll get close enough to see what's making that red glow. And they won't come back. Because the ocean takes what it wants. And what it wants are the people who refuse to respect its mysteries, who insist on knowing what should remain unknown, who believe that human understanding trumps ancient secrets. The ocean is patient. It can wait forever. And when fog provides cover and red light provides temptation and curiosity provides motivation, the ocean claims another boat, another fisherman, another person who learned too late that some questions shouldn't be asked. I was lucky. I asked no questions. I waited. I survived. And now I tell my story to anyone who will listen, hoping they'll be smart enough to do the same. Because the red light is still out there, in the deep water where pressure crushes and darkness rules, waiting for the next fog bank to roll in, waiting for the next curious fisherman to see it rise and wonder what it is, waiting to show them, and then to pull them down into depths where light is red and sounds are mechanical and return is impossible. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and some secrets are meant to kill those who discover them. The night started like any other night. Clear sky, stars so bright you could navigate by them if your instruments failed. The Pacific stretched out in every direction. Black water meeting black sky at a horizon you couldn't quite see, but knew was there. I'm Calder Marwick, and I've been running nets in these waters for 19 years. Long enough to know that the ocean has moods, has patterns, has ways of telling you when something's about to change. But that night I didn't pick up any warnings, didn't notice any signs, just thought it was going to be another routine trip. Nilo Vespra was making coffee in the galley when I checked the time. Just past 11. The kid was on his first trip, 19 years old, full of questions and enthusiasm that reminded me of myself before the ocean taught me that eagerness isn't the same as understanding. He'd been asking about everything since we left port that morning. How deep did we fish? What kind of catch were we targeting? How did you read the sonar? How long did nets usually stay down? Good questions. Intelligent questions. The kind that showed he was actually thinking about the work instead of just going through motions. "Coffee's almost ready," he called from below. "You want me to bring you a cup?" "Yeah," I said. "Black, no sugar." Torben Cahill was outside on the deck, checking the winch one more time before we deployed the net. Torben was what you'd call a lifer. 53 years old, been fishing since he was 16, knew boats and equipment and ocean better than most people knew their own houses. We'd worked together 7 seasons and I'd learned to trust his judgment completely. When Torben said the equipment was ready, it was ready. When he said something felt wrong, you listened. He came into the cabin, shaking water off his jacket. Everything's good out there, he said. Winch is running smooth. Net looks clean. Cables are solid. Weather's holding fair. Should be a good night. Nilo brought up 3 cups of coffee, and we stood in the cabin drinking them, looking out at the dark water, not talking much because there wasn't much to say. This was the rhythm of the work. Prepare, deploy, wait, retrieve. Over and over. Some nights you caught enough to make the trip worthwhile. Some nights you caught barely enough to cover fuel costs. You never knew until the net came up and you saw what was in it. At midnight I gave the order and we deployed the net. Torben ran the winch while Nilo and I handled the lines, making sure everything paid out smoothly without tangling. The net sank into the black water, the cables following it down, the marker buoys bobbing on the surface to show where we'd dropped it. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, the kind of deployment we'd done hundreds of times before. The sonar showed the net settling at 200 meters. Good depth for this area, deep enough to get below where the smaller fish stayed, shallow enough that we weren't wasting time and fuel pulling from truly deep water. The screen showed fish activity down there, schools moving through, the kind of patterns that suggested we'd have a decent catch when we hauled it back up. "How long do we leave it down?" Nilo asked. 3 hours, usually, I said. Gives fish time to find it and get caught. Go down too soon and you're pulling up an empty net. Wait too long and the catch starts to spoil or predators come in and tear up what you've got. Nilo nodded, taking mental notes like everything I said was important wisdom instead of just accumulated experience. That was the thing about young fishermen. They thought there were secrets to learn, special techniques that separated successful crews from unsuccessful ones. The truth was simpler and less romantic. You worked hard, you paid attention, you got lucky more often than you got unlucky, and eventually you had enough money saved to retire before your body gave out completely. We spent the waiting time doing what fishing crews always did. Drank coffee, told stories, played cards for small stakes, checked equipment that didn't need checking because doing something was better than just sitting. Nilo asked more questions, and I answered them, trying to give him useful information without overwhelming him with details he wouldn't remember anyway. Torben mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment or correction when I got something wrong. Around 2 a.m., I went out on deck to smoke. I'd quit cigarettes years ago but kept a pack in the cabin for nights like this, when the waiting got long and the darkness felt heavy. The air was cold, that particular Pacific cold that comes with moisture and salt, the kind that seeps through your clothes and settles into your bones. The stars were still bright overhead, constellations I'd learned to recognize over years of night work. Orion low on the horizon, Big Dipper high and clear, the faint smear of the Milky Way cutting across the sky. I thought about nothing in particular. That was one of the gifts of this work. These moments of empty mind when you could just exist without thinking, without planning, without worrying about anything beyond the next few hours. The ocean had a way of reducing life to its essential elements. You, the boat, the water, the catch. Everything else faded to background noise that you could ignore until you got back to port. Torben joined me on deck, lighting his own cigarette even though he'd quit 3 times in the past 2 years. "Quiet night," he said. "Yeah. Too quiet, maybe." I looked at him. "You feeling something?" He shrugged. "No, yes, I don't know. Just feels like one of those nights where something happens." "Something always happens," I said. "That's fishing. You know what I mean?" I did know. There were nights when everything felt normal right up until it wasn't, when the routine broke and you found yourself dealing with situations you hadn't anticipated. Equipment failure, sudden weather, encounters with things you couldn't explain. Every fisherman had stories about those nights, the ones that broke the pattern, the ones you remembered years later when everything else had blurred into generic memory. We finished our cigarettes and went back inside. Nilo was at the sonar station, watching the screen like it might reveal secrets if he stared hard enough. "There's a lot of activity down there," he said. "More than before." I looked at the screen. He was right. The fish schools had multiplied, or maybe they'd just concentrated in the area where our net sat. The sonar was showing dense clusters of returns, the kind of pattern that suggested our net was probably filling nicely. "Might be a good haul," Torben said. At 3 a.m. exactly, Torben moved to the winch controls. Time to bring it up, see what we'd caught, find out if the night had been profitable or just expensive. I went out on deck to watch the retrieval, to make sure the net came up clean without snagging on anything. Nilo followed me, eager to see his first net retrieval, probably imagining tons of fish spilling across the deck like some kind of maritime jackpot. Torben engaged the winch. The drum began to turn, the cable started to wind, everything proceeding normally. The motor hummed with its usual sound, steady and reliable. I could see the cable emerging from the water, could see it wrapping around the drum in neat layers, could see the marker buoys getting closer as the net rose from 200 meters below. Then Torben made a sound, not loud, just a grunt of surprise or concern. I looked at him through the cabin window and saw his expression change from routine concentration to puzzled attention. "What?" I called. "It's heavy," he said. His voice carried through the open cabin door. "Really heavy." I walked closer to the rail, watching the cable. It was under strain, more tension than I'd expect from even a full net. The cable was humming, that particular high-pitched vibration that happens when steel is stretched close to its limit. The boat was starting to list slightly to starboard, pulled by whatever weight was coming up from below. "Could be we snagged bottom," Nilo said. "Caught some rocks or coral." "Bottom's at 400 meters, I said. "We weren't fishing that deep." But even as I said it, I was thinking about other possibilities. Debris. Maybe a shipping container that had fallen off a cargo ship and settled at mid-depth. Wreckage from a boat or airplane. Tangled kelp in quantities that could weigh tons. All possible explanations for unexpected weight. The list increased. 5 degrees, 7 degrees, 10 degrees. Water was starting to slosh over the starboard rail, not flooding but definitely getting higher than it should. The winch motor was laboring now, working hard, the sound changing from steady hum to strained groan. "This isn't right," Torben said. He'd reduced the winch speed to minimum, taking it careful, not wanting to tear the net or snap the cable, but even at minimum speed the boat was leaning harder. 12 degrees, 15 degrees. Getting into dangerous territory now, the kind of list that could lead to flooding if it got much worse. I checked our stability, did the mental math I'd learned over years of experience. We were still safe, but approaching the edge. A few more degrees, and we'd be at risk of taking on water, of losing control, of potentially capsizing if the weight shifted suddenly. "Stop the winch," I said. Torben hit the brake without hesitation. The drum locked, the cable went rigid, the boat settled at its current angle. We stood there in the sudden silence, just the sound of the motor idling and water moving against the hull, trying to understand what was happening. Nilo looked scared. Not panicked, but definitely scared in the way young people get when they realize the world doesn't always follow the rules they've been taught. "What do we do?" he asked. "First we figure out what we're dealing with," I said. "Then we decide." I grabbed the spotlight and aimed it at the water where the cable disappeared below the surface. The beam penetrated maybe 10 or 12 meters, showing dark water and the cable descending into blackness. Nothing else visible. No indication of what was down there pulling the boat over. "I could put on a wetsuit," Nilo said. Dive down and see what's caught." "No," I said immediately. "Nobody goes in the water until we know what we're dealing with. Could be something sharp down there, could be something unstable, could be any number of things that would make diving dangerous." But I understood his impulse. Standing here blind was maddening. Not knowing was worse than knowing, even if what you learned was bad news. Every fisherman's instinct was to investigate, to understand, to solve the problem instead of just staring at it. I remembered we had the underwater camera. Simple setup, just a camera in a waterproof housing with its own light, attached to a cable that let you lower it and see what it saw on a small monitor. We'd used it before to inspect the hull when we thought we'd hit something, to check the rudder when we suspected damage. Wasn't sophisticated, but it worked well enough for basic investigation. I got the camera from its storage locker and lowered it over the rail, following the line of the net cable down into the black water. The monitor showed grainy footage, the camera's LED light barely penetrating the darkness. I could see the cable descending straight down, could see particles in the water catching the light, could see the vague shapes of fish swimming past. But I couldn't see the net itself. Still too deep. I fed out more cable, watching the monitor, waiting for the net to appear. 50 meters, 60 meters, 70 meters. The water was getting clearer as I went deeper, fewer particles, less turbulence. And then, at what the cable counter said was about 90 meters, I saw it. The net appeared on the monitor, suspended in dark water, bulging with its catch. Except it wasn't bulging the way a net full of fish should bulge. Instead of the smooth, rounded shape of fish packed together, the net was distended, stretched, pushed out from the inside by something that wasn't fish-shaped. And in the camera's LED light I could see colors that weren't fish colors. Pale, almost white, with darker patches that might have been shadows or might have been something else. "What is that?" Torben asked. He'd come out on deck and was looking at the monitor over my shoulder. "I don't know," I said. "Can't see clearly enough." I adjusted the camera angle, trying to get a better view. The camera twisted on its cable, the light swinging across the net, and for just a moment I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A face, or what looked like a face, pressed against the net mesh like someone looking through a screen. Then the camera swung away, and all I could see was the bulging net and the dark water around it. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" "Thought I saw—" "Never mind." I pulled the camera back up, not wanting to look at the monitor anymore, not wanting to see that face again if it appeared. My hands were shaking slightly as I coiled the camera cable. Nilo was staring at me. "What did you see?" "Probably nothing," I said. "Bad light, grainy camera, tired eyes. Easy to see things that aren't there." But I'd seen it. Seen something that looked like a human face pressed against the net. And if there was one face, if someone had drowned and gotten caught in our net, then we had a completely different kind of problem. A legal problem, a moral problem, a problem that would involve Coast Guard investigations and incident reports and questions about how someone had ended up in the water at 200 meters and how we'd managed to catch them in our fishing net. "We need to bring it up," Torben said. "Whatever it is, we can't leave it down there. If it's a body, if someone drowned, we have an obligation to recover them." He was right, but the thought of bringing up a net with a drowned person in it made me feel sick. I'd fished for 19 years and never caught anything human. Fish, sure, plenty of fish. Some seals, a few dolphins that had gotten tangled and drowned before we could free them. Once a sea turtle, but never a person, never someone who'd been alive and breathing and had a name and a family. "Slow retrieval," I said. "Take it careful. If the boat lists past 20 degrees, we cut the net and let it go. Not worth capsizing over." Torben nodded and went back to the winch controls. Nilo stood beside me at the rail, watching the water, waiting to see what would emerge. The winch engaged again, the drum turning slowly, the cable winding gradually. The boat's list increased, 18 degrees, 20 degrees, 22 degrees. Water was coming over the starboard rail steadily now, flooding across the deck, making the footing slippery. 23 degrees, Torben called out. Getting close to limit. Keep going, I said, but slow, very slow. The cable kept rising. I could see it emerging from the water now, could see the net just below the surface, a dark mass of tangled mesh and whatever was inside it. The spotlight was on, illuminating the water, and in that harsh white light I started to see shapes, pale shapes, many of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, all pressed against the net mesh like faces behind a screen. Jesus Christ, Nilo whispered. They looked like corpses. That was my first thought. They looked like drowned people, like victims of some massive maritime disaster. Bodies everywhere, packed into the net so tightly they were pressed against each other, faces flattened against the mesh, mouths open in expressions that could have been screams, or just the natural slack of death. Pale skin, bloated features, eyes that might have been closed or might have been missing entirely. The net broke the surface completely and hung there from the winch, dripping water and seaweed, suspended above the deck. In the spotlight I could see them clearly now. Dozens of faces, maybe 100 or more, all looking almost but not quite human. Something about the proportions was wrong. Eyes too far apart or too close together. Mouths too wide or too narrow. Noses that didn't quite match the rest of the facial structure. Like someone had made approximations of human faces, but had never actually seen one up close. Torben had stopped the winch. He was standing at the controls staring at the net with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. Profound unease. The look of someone confronting something that shouldn't exist. "Are those real?" Nilo asked. His voice was shaking. "Are those actual people?" I moved closer to the net, forcing myself to examine what we'd brought up, even though everything in me wanted to turn away. The faces were definitely wrong. Not just dead wrong, but structurally wrong. I could see it more clearly now that the net was out of the water. The skin texture was too smooth, too uniform, like rubber or plastic instead of actual human tissue. And the expressions, those open-mouthed horror expressions, were too similar, like they'd all been frozen in exactly the same moment of exactly the same emotion. "Those aren't people," I said. I don't know what they are, but they're not people." "Training dummies," Torben suggested. "Like they use for rescue drills?" It was a rational explanation. Training dummies did look vaguely human, and they could end up in the ocean if they fell off a ship or got discarded. But training dummies were light, filled with foam or air. They didn't weigh enough to list a fishing boat 15 degrees. And they didn't have this level of detail, this precision in the facial features, this disturbing quality that made you want to look away but couldn't. "Why would training dummies be at 200 meters?" Nilo asked. Nobody had an answer. We stood there on the tilted deck, water sloshing around our feet, staring at a net full of things that looked almost human, but clearly weren't. The boat's motor idled in the background. A steady rumble that was the only normal sound in a situation that had become completely abnormal. I grabbed the boat hook, thinking I'd pull the net closer, examine the contents more carefully, try to understand what we were looking at. But when the hook touched the net mesh, something changed. The faces moved. Not much, just a slight inflation, like something inside them was expanding. And from the net, from whatever those things were, came a sound. It was low and wet. like air escaping from punctured lungs. A collective exhalation that seemed to come from every face simultaneously. The sound lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, rising slightly in pitch before cutting off abruptly. Then silence again, just the motor and the water and our own breathing. We stood frozen. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The net hung from the winch, dripping, full of faces that might be dead or might be something else entirely. The sound had been organic, had been biological in a way that plastic or rubber couldn't produce, but it hadn't been human, hadn't sounded like anything I'd ever heard from a person. "We need to call the Coast Guard," Nilo said. His voice was tight, controlled, like he was working hard to stay calm. "We need to report this right now." He was absolutely right. Whatever this was, it was beyond our capability to handle. This was search and rescue territory, or more likely search and recovery. This was evidence of something, though what exactly I couldn't begin to guess. A mass drowning that had never been reported? A plane crash at sea? Some kind of illegal dumping? None of those explanations made sense, but we needed professionals to figure it out. I reached for the radio, but before I could key the microphone, I noticed something. The faces were changing. The features, those horrible approximations of human characteristics, were losing their definition. Like ice melting in warm water, like wax softening near a flame. The eyes blurred, the mouths ran together, the noses flattened. Within seconds, what had looked like faces became just masses of gray-white material, formless and organic. "What the hell is happening?" Torben said. We watched, unable to do anything else, as the transformation continued. The masses began to break apart, to dissolve, to turn liquid. What had been solid or solid-seeming became fluid, viscous, thicker than normal water, but definitely liquid. It poured through the net mesh in streams and drops, falling back into the ocean with small splashes that sounded too heavy, too dense, like the liquid had weight that water shouldn't have. The boat began to right itself as the weight disappeared. The list decreased: 15 degrees, 12 degrees, 10 degrees, 5 degrees, level. The winch relaxed as tension left the cable. Within maybe 90 seconds, the net was nearly empty. Just strands of seaweed, a few regular fish flopping in the mesh, and nothing else. No faces, no masses, no evidence of what we'd just been staring at. Nilo was breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. Did that just happen? Did we all just see that? I couldn't answer. I was staring at the net, at the few fish struggling in its mesh, at the complete absence of the hundreds of faces that had been there moments ago. Gone, dissolved, poured back into the ocean like they'd never existed. Torben brought the net aboard with shaking hands. The winch lowered it onto the deck and we gathered around it, looking at what remained. Regular fish. Rockfish, lingcod, a few smaller species. Normal catch. Nothing unusual except for the amount of seaweed tangled in the mesh, more than we'd typically get from that depth. We sorted through the fish carefully, checking each one, looking for anything that might explain what we'd seen. Nothing. Just fish. Just normal Pacific fish that we caught every night, that we'd sold at market hundreds of times, that had no connection to dissolving faces or sounds like escaping air. We all saw the same thing, right? Nilo asked. This wasn't just me. We all saw it, I said. Then what was it? I didn't have an answer, still don't. We stood on the deck for a long time, not talking, just trying to process what had happened. The ocean around us was calm, the sky still full of stars, everything normal except for our racing hearts and shaking hands and the memory of faces pressed against net mesh. Finally, Torben spoke. Maybe it was a mass hallucination, he said. Fatigue, Bad light. Our minds playing tricks. We all saw the same thing because we were all looking at the same unclear shapes and our brains filled in details that weren't really there. Hallucinations don't list a boat 15 degrees, I said. Hallucinations don't weigh anything. Then what was it? He asked. What rational explanation is there for what we just saw? I didn't have one. Couldn't think of any possible explanation that would account for faces that appeared and then dissolved, for weight that nearly capsized us and then disappeared, for sounds that came from things that shouldn't be able to make sounds. We need to decide what we're going to do, I said. We can report this to the Coast Guard, try to explain what we saw, deal with the investigation and questions and skepticism. Or we can finish the trip, take this catch back to port, and not mention what happened. Not mention it, Nilo said. How can we not mention it? What would we tell them? I asked. That we caught a net full of fake faces that dissolved before we could prove they existed? That something from the deep water came up in our net and turned liquid when exposed to air or light or different pressure? Who would believe that? Nilo looked at Torben, then back at me. You're saying we just pretend this didn't happen? I'm saying we need to think carefully about what we report and how we report it. Because if we tell this story exactly as it happened, we're going to be laughed at. Or worse, investigated. They'll think we're hiding something, covering up an actual drowning, trying to avoid responsibility for something criminal. Torben nodded slowly. He's right. We have no evidence. The net is empty. The camera footage will just show a bulging net, nothing more. Our word against physics and common sense, nobody's going to believe us. So, what do we do? Nilo asked. We finish the trip, I said. We fish for a few more hours, fill the hold with normal catch, go back to port and sell what we caught. And we don't talk about this. Not to other fishermen, not to harbor authorities, not to anyone who wasn't here and didn't see it. Nilo was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but I want it on record that I think this is wrong. I think we should report what we saw. Noted, I said. But I'm the captain, and this is my decision. We stay quiet. We deployed the net again in different waters and brought up normal catches for the rest of the night. By the time the sun rose, we had enough fish to make the trip profitable. We headed back to port and unloaded our catch without incident. Other fishermen asked about the trip and we told them it had been normal, decent catch, nothing unusual. Nobody questioned us. Nobody suspected we were hiding anything. But I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. For days afterward, lying in bed trying to sleep, I'd remember those faces pressed against the net, the wrong proportions, the too smooth skin, the expressions that weren't quite right. I'd remember the sound they made, that wet exhalation that couldn't have come from plastic or rubber or any manufactured material. I'd remember watching them dissolve, seeing them lose form and pour through the mesh like thick water. I checked the underwater camera footage a week later, going through every second of what I'd recorded when I lowered it to look at the net. The footage showed exactly what I remembered. The net descending, the dark water, the murky visibility. But there were no faces visible, no pale shapes pressed against mesh, just an indistinct bulge that could have been anything. The camera had either failed to record what was actually there, or my eyes had seen something the camera couldn't capture. Nilo quit after that trip. Came to see me at the harbor 3 days after we got back and told me fishing wasn't for him, that he'd decided to pursue a different career. Said it apologetically, like he was letting me down, like he felt bad about abandoning the work after just one night. I told him I understood, that fishing wasn't for everyone, that there was no shame in realizing it wasn't the right fit. It's not the work, he said. The work is fine. It's what we saw out there. I can't stop thinking about it. Can't stop seeing those faces, can't stop wondering what they were. Best not to think about it, I said. Best to just move on. Can you do that? Can you just forget what we saw? No, I admitted, but I can try. He left for the city after that, got a job doing something on computers, married a woman who'd never seen the ocean, started a life that had nothing to do with fishing or boats or nets that brought up impossible things. Smart choice, probably. Safer choice. The kind of choice someone makes when they've brushed against something they don't want to understand. Torben and I talked about it exactly once. A week after it happened, over coffee at the harbor. Neither of us mentioned it directly at first, just danced around the subject, talking about normal things, catching up on harbor gossip. Finally, I asked him straight out, "What do you think we saw out there?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, like he'd been thinking about them for days, and was still uncertain if he believed what he was saying. "I think the ocean grows things," he said. "Things we don't have names for. Things that exist in the deep water where there's no light and the pressure would kill us instantly. And I think those things study what they find down there. Bodies that sink, wreckage that settles, anything that falls from the surface world into their world. And they copy it," I asked. "Try to recreate it? Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to understand it. Maybe they're not smart enough to get the details exactly right. Maybe they see a human face and they know it's important somehow, but they can't quite capture what makes it human, so they make approximations. Close enough to recognize, but not close enough to be real." It was as good an explanation as any, better than most. The idea that something in the deep ocean had found human bodies, had studied them, had tried to recreate them but couldn't quite get the details right, had made faces that were close but not quite correct, had built structures that looked human from a distance but dissolved when exposed to the wrong environment. "You think that's what we caught?" I asked. "Some kind of oceanic recreation of drowned people?" Torben shrugged. "I don't know. But it's the only explanation I can think of that accounts for everything we saw. The weight, the appearance, the dissolution. Something that exists naturally in deep water. Something that's adapted to high pressure and cold and darkness. Something that can't survive when it gets pulled to the surface into warm air and light." "And the sound?" I asked. "That exhalation? Maybe that's how they breathe. Or how they communicate. Or just the sound they make when they're dying. We don't know. Can't know. Because they're all gone now, dissolved back into the ocean, leaving no evidence except our memory." We finished our coffee and went back to work. Torben kept fishing with me for another 2 seasons before retiring. Moved to Hawaii, bought a small place near the beach, said he wanted to live near the ocean, but not on it, not anymore. We stay in touch, send occasional emails, but we never talk about that night. Never mention the faces in the net. Like if we don't talk about it, we can pretend it didn't happen. But it did happen. I know it happened because I was there. Because I saw it. Because I remember it with a clarity that dreams and hallucinations don't have. I remember the weight of the net pulling the boat over. I remember the faces pressed against the mesh. I remember the sound they made. I remember watching them dissolve. I don't fish that area anymore. Marked it in my charts as bad grounds. Told other fishermen the catch there isn't worth the fuel. Nobody questions it. Every fisherman has areas they avoid for reasons they don't fully explain. Personal superstitions, bad experiences, gut feelings that certain coordinates bring trouble. It's accepted practice to respect those boundaries without asking for detailed explanations. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the ocean is quiet, I think about what Torben said, about the ocean growing things, mimicking what it finds. And I wonder what else is down there in the deep water. What else has been found and studied and imperfectly recreated? What else rises in nets at 3 a.m. and dissolves before anyone can prove it existed? The Pacific is deep, deeper than most people realize. Average depth over 4 kilometers, maximum depth in the Mariana Trench over 11 kilometers. That's 7 miles of water in some places, 7 miles of pressure and darkness and cold that's completely hostile to human life. We can't go there without special equipment. Can't survive in that environment for even seconds without protection. But something lives there. Has to. Because life exists in every environment on Earth where life is possible, and the deep ocean is no exception. We've mapped less than 5% of the ocean floor. We've explored less than 1% of the deep ocean volume. We don't know what's down there. Can't know until we go there and look. And maybe some things are better left unknown. Maybe the deep ocean's inhabitants should stay in the deep ocean, and we should stay on the surface, and the boundary between our worlds should remain intact. Because when that boundary breaks, when something from down there comes up here, or something from up here goes down there, nobody benefits. They're terrified and lost, pulled into an environment that's wrong for them, exposed to conditions they're not adapted to handle. We're terrified and confused, confronted with evidence that we don't understand and can't explain. And the only solution is for them to go back down where they belong, and for us to stay up here where we belong. That's what happened in the net. Something from the deep water got caught in our net by accident, got hauled to the surface where it couldn't survive, where it dissolved or died or transformed back into whatever it really was beneath the appearance it had constructed. An accident, a mistake, a brief intersection of 2 worlds that were never meant to touch. Except, I don't think it was an accident. I think we were fishing in waters that border the deep, in areas where the continental shelf drops away and the bottom falls to depths we never work. I think something from those depths had come up, had risen to shallower water for reasons I can't guess. And our net, deployed at 200 meters, caught it. Or maybe it let itself be caught. Maybe it was curious about the surface world, about the boats that work the water, about the humans who drop nets into the deep. Maybe it wanted to see what would happen if it came up, wanted to understand our world the way it had studied our dead in its world. And when it arrived on the surface, when it hung in our net under bright lights in warm air, it discovered that its creations couldn't survive in our environment. The approximations it had made, those almost human faces, they broke down when exposed to conditions they weren't designed for. They dissolved, returned to their base material, poured back into the ocean like thick water. That's what I think about late at night. Not that we caught something by accident, but that something let us catch it, that it was curious, or testing, or trying to communicate. That the faces were a message, an attempt to show us what they'd found, what they'd learned, what they could create from the bodies we'd sent down to them over centuries of maritime disasters. And maybe the message was, we know you're up there. We've studied what you look like. We're trying to understand you. And someday, maybe soon, we'll get it right. We'll make something that looks exactly human, that can survive on the surface, that can walk among you without you knowing what it really is. That thought keeps me awake. Not what I saw in the net, but what it implies. Not the faces that dissolved, but the learning process those faces represent. Not the mystery itself, but the progression of that mystery toward some kind of conclusion. Because if they're learning, if they're improving their approximations with each iteration, then eventually they'll succeed. Eventually they'll create something that doesn't dissolve in warm air, that maintains its form in light and its surface pressure, that can pass for human in every way that matters. And when that happens, when the first perfect approximation climbs out of the ocean and walks onto land, what then? Will we recognize it? Will we know that it's not really human, that it came from the deep water where things grow in darkness? or will it blend in, pass among us, learn even more about what we are? I don't want to find the answer to those questions. Don't want to be alive when the ocean finishes its study and sends its creation ashore. Don't want to meet something that looks human but isn't, that walks and talks with knowledge gleaned from centuries of drownings. So I fish in safer waters now. Stay away from the deep grounds where things grow and learn and wait. Bring up normal catches that contain only fish. Nothing that looks human, nothing that presses against the mesh with expressions that might be fear or curiosity or hunger or something else we don't have words for. And I hope that others do the same. Hope that fishermen everywhere will learn to avoid the places where nets bring up impossible things. Learn to cut loose anything that looks wrong. Learn to sail away when the catch is too heavy and faces appear in the mesh. Because the ocean is patient, it has all the time in the world to perfect its creations. And every boat that sinks, every person that drowns, every body that settles on the deep ocean floor is another specimen to study, another example to learn from, another piece of data to incorporate into the next iteration. The faces in our net were wrong, flawed, imperfect approximations that dissolved when exposed to our world. But they were closer than previous attempts must have been, closer to human than whatever came before them. And the next ones will be closer still. And eventually, perhaps not in my lifetime, but maybe in Nilo's or in the generation after that, the approximations will become perfect. And then we'll find out what the ocean wants with its human-shaped creations. Whether they're just an attempt to understand, or whether they're something else. Scouts, infiltrators. The first wave of something we can't predict and might not survive. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight I fish, and I watch, and I remember. Remember the weight of that net, the list of the boat, the faces pressed against the mesh. Remember thinking they looked human until I looked closer and saw all the ways they weren't. And I'm grateful they dissolved. Grateful I don't have proof. Grateful I can pretend it was nothing. Because the alternative is accepting that something in the deep ocean is watching us. Learning from us. Building copies of us from what they find in the dark water. And I'm not ready to accept that, not yet, maybe not ever. So I fish, and I try to forget. And I hope that when I pull up my nets, they contain only fish. Just fish. Nothing else. Please God, nothing else ever again.